Ishmael is, for me, the narrator has a voice like no other. A lot of really scary stuff happens in Moby Dick. Ahab is just this incredible force of evil, complicated and highly personable in an unsettling way. But then there is Ishmael, who has, as a narrator, a voice that can be funny, that can be filled with foreboding, can take you anywhere. And he also has a point of view, which I think can get lost in what happens ultimately when Ahab meets Moby Dick. He has a point of view that I find quite redemptive. And remember, everyone goes down with the Pequod except for Ishmael. He is the lone survivor, as much like Melville would prove to be. Even though after Melville had died, he is our great literary survivor. Ishmael, I think there are reasons why Ishmael survives, and his voice is one that I find it does more to help us find a way to lead a life in a world that really makes no sense. You know, how do you deal with it? Ishmael shows there's no easy way, but what I'd like to read to you now is a short piece from a chapter. This book is divided. As you can see, this is slenderer than even the hardcover, but it's a slender volume. I tried to keep it as slender and non-threatening as Moby Dick is fat and intimidating. And it's broken into short chapters, each one trying to get at the novel in a different way. And one of the early chapters in my book is called Desperado Philosophy, and it's sort of it's Ishmael as a narrator. And what does he do for us? In the beginning, he is an immensely appealing narrator. He talks about he is someone who's known depression, damp, drizzly November of his soul. And you know, if you're an adolescent, if that doesn't hit you, I don't know what won't. But then he can be really funny, and then he can be absolutely taken in and blighted by Ahab's charisma, and yet he is the one who finally is found floating on Queequeg's coffin. And so this is a little chapter about Ishmael. Later in the book, after he is almost killed, when his whaleboat is smacked by a whale before being swamped in a squall, Ishmael decides it might be a good idea, after all, to write his will. Up until this time, he sees whaling as this, it's going to be the greatest adventure of my life. I'm not worried. Now he begins to see things differently. And it is here, in chapter 49, the hyena, that he hits upon the approach to life that will act as the emotional and philosophical center of the novel. There are certain queer times and occasions in the strange mixed affair we call life, he tells us, when a man takes this whole universe for a vast practical joke, though the wit thereof he but dimly discerns and more than suspects that the joke is at nobody's expense but his own. Ishmael describes this approach to life as a free and easy sort of genial desperado philosophy. In the chapters to come, Ahab will drag him and all of us into the howling depths of the human psyche. In the beginning, however, before Ahab takes hold, we are in the presence of a soul so buoyant, so mischievous, so wise, and so much fun, that even after the worst happens at the end of the novel, we can take consolation in knowing that at least Ishmael has found a way to survive. Like Melville, who is one of our country's greatest literary survivors, Ishmael is left to tell the tale, and we better listen to every word. Now, one of the things I talk about in this book, which is the backwash that Melville lived after publishing this novel. This novel came out in November of 1851. Hawthorne and his wife Sophia loved it, but not many other people did. It was not a critical success or popular success. He would be in a downward spiral from here on in, although he would continue to write and write some really good stuff. But Nathaniel Hawthorne would leave the Berkshires, and I think Melville's exuberance was a little too much for this shy, retired, older writer, and so he fled up back to Concord eventually. And Melville was left in the Berkshires. He would write some incredible short stories and some other novels, but would eventually move back to New York during the Civil War. By this time, everything he felt coming had erupted with the Civil War. He would get a job as a customs inspector, work for close to 20 years, but eventually he and his wife, whose marriage was deeply troubled, he would have one son. One of his sons would die of apparently suicide, shooting himself in his bedroom as a teenager. Another son would die alone in San Francisco. And, but eventually Melville would be able to retire when he and his wife came into a small inheritance, and he would continue to read and write. And ultimately, when he died, would not be appreciated or really discovered until much later. On his desk was Billy Budd, one of the great novellas of all time. And so he continued to be artistically very engaged and productive. But, you know, on his, at his death, you know, the question is, you know, how do you go on after writing Moby Dick and having no one notice? It's a book we now all recognize as this great classic, but he moved on. In the months after writing Moby Dick, he visited Nantucket for the first time. Can you imagine this? After penning Moby Dick, the next July, he went there under very extremely inauspicious circumstances. He traveled with his father-in-law, who was the circuit judge, and stayed at what's now the Jared Coffin House. And there he met Captain George Pollard, who had been captain of the Essex, what I wrote about in the Heart of the Sea. So he meets you know, one of the actual people associated with this, the incident that inspired the climax of Moby Dick. And by this point, Melville had kind of the tar kicked out of him, and it's Pollard who he latches onto, someone who had lived through the worst that a whaling captain can live through, but continued on. Pollard would spend the rest of his life on Nantucket as a night watchman, and greatly respected in the community. And the thought of Pollard and Melville meeting on Nantucket in July of 1852 is amazing. But he would then write, it seems to have written a novel based on a story he heard about a Nantucket wife and mother who gave birth to a daughter. Her husband went off for 17 years, not to be heard from again, and eventually would come back. And it would be a story of abandonment and loss that he would eventually write, but never publish. So this is the great lost Melville novel that appears to be inspired, at least, about Nantucket and about the whole sense of this getting over the worst that can happen. And when Melville died, they found in his study a writing desk, a portable open bottom writing desk, and taped inside was a motto printed, and the motto was, "Keep true to the dreams of thy youth." And I'd just now like to finish by reading a little bit that takes up from that. The phrase comes from the German playwright and poet Friedrich Schiller. But what was its relevance to Melville? Late in life, he wrote to his brother-in-law, "At my years and with my disposition, or rather constitution, one gets to care less and less for everything except downright good feeling. Life is so short and so ridiculous and irrational from a certain point of view that one knows not what to make of it unless, well, finish the sentence for yourself." I propose that Melville would have finished that sentence with the words taped inside his writing desk. In the end, Melville had found a way back to the view espoused by Ishmael in Moby Dick. Doubts of all things earthly and intuitions of some things heavenly, this combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. This redemptive mixture of skepticism and hope, this genial stoicism in the face of a short, ridiculous, and irrational life is why I read Moby Dick. Thank you.